Have you ever woken up and realized that something felt completely wrong, even though you couldn't explain why? Sometimes it isn't a loud argument, a broken door, or a shocking confession. Sometimes it's a single strange moment that refuses to leave your mind. A smile that doesn't seem natural. A conversation that suddenly stops when you enter the room. A family member acting just a little too comfortable hiding something. Those tiny moments can grow into questions that change everything. Today's story is one of those moments. What started as an ordinary weekend inside a quiet family home slowly turned into a mystery filled with secrets, misunderstandings, and painful choices. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Life was moving along like it always had. A blended family trying to build trust, a marriage that looked stable from the outside, and a stepson who seemed to be adjusting well to his new life. But appearances can be deceiving, and sometimes the truth hides behind the most ordinary routines. The man at the center of this story believed he knew the people closest to him. He trusted his wife. He wanted to be a good father figure. He thought the difficult days of bringing two families together were finally behind them. Yet one unexpected morning, after sleeping later than usual, he noticed something that didn't fit. It wasn't proof of anything. It wasn't a dramatic discovery. It was simply a series of small details that refused to make sense. His stepson appeared unusually cheerful, almost as if he had been celebrating something. His wife seemed nervous in a way he had never seen before. Casual questions received awkward answers. Eye contact became shorter. Simple conversations suddenly felt forced. None of it was enough to accuse anyone of wrongdoing, but together those moments planted a seed of doubt that wouldn't go away. As the days passed, the strange behavior continued. Little inconsistencies began to stack up. Missing pieces of conversations. Unexplained trips outside the house. Locked phones that had never been locked before. Late-night whispers behind closed doors. Every answer only seemed to create another question. Was he becoming paranoid? Was stress causing him to imagine problems that didn't exist? Or was there truly a hidden story unfolding inside the very home he worked so hard to protect? The more he tried to ignore his instincts, the louder they became. Friends noticed he seemed distracted. His work started to suffer. Even the peaceful moments at home felt different. Every laugh sounded rehearsed. Every silence felt heavier than before. Trust, once so easy to give, slowly became the hardest thing to hold on to. This is not just another family drama. It's a story about trust, difficult relationships, emotional consequences, and the hidden truths that can quietly reshape an entire family. If you enjoy emotional family stories, step-family relationship stories, mystery storytelling, and dramatic plot twists inspired by real-life situations, you're going to want to stay until the very end. Every conversation, every clue, and every decision matters more than it first appears. But here's the twist. Just when he finally decided to stop ignoring the warning signs, he came across one unexpected detail that made his heart race. It wasn't what he expected to find, and it raised a question that would change the direction of the entire story. Whether it pointed toward betrayal, a painful misunderstanding, or something no one could have predicted, he had no way of knowing. And that was only the beginning. For the rest of that day, he tried to convince himself that he was overthinking everything. After all, families go through awkward phases. Blended families especially need time to adjust, and he knew that better than anyone. When he married his wife, he had promised himself that he would never treat her son as anything less than family. Building trust had taken months, filled with small victories and occasional setbacks, but eventually the house had started to feel like home for everyone. Looking back, he realized there had been subtle changes over the past few weeks. His wife, who normally shared every detail about her day, had become more private. She seemed distracted during dinner conversations, often checking her phone before quickly turning the screen away. It wasn't dramatic enough to start an argument, but it was different. And different was enough to make him wonder if something was happening that he didn't know about. His stepson had changed too, though in a completely different way. The teenager suddenly seemed unusually excited, carrying himself with a confidence that hadn't been there before. He laughed more often, stayed busy around the house, and occasionally exchanged quick glances with his mother that felt impossible to read. They weren't suspicious on their own, but together they created a pattern that refused to leave his mind. He kept asking himself the same question: was he seeing connections that didn't actually exist? People often notice ordinary things once doubt enters their thoughts. He didn't want to become the kind of husband who assumed the worst without evidence. Trust mattered, and he believed accusations without proof could destroy a family just as easily as secrets could. Still, one memory kept replaying in his head. A few nights earlier, he had walked into the kitchen late for a glass of water. The conversation between his wife and stepson had stopped the moment they noticed him. Both smiled, but the silence afterward felt heavier than the conversation itself. He hadn't thought much of it then. Now, it seemed impossible to forget. Instead of confronting anyone, he decided to pay closer attention. Not to spy, but to understand. He wanted facts, not assumptions. If there was an innocent explanation, he wanted to find it before allowing fear to take control. But if there truly was a hidden problem affecting his family, pretending everything was normal would only make things worse. The following morning seemed ordinary until one small discovery caught his attention. It wasn't a message, a photograph, or a dramatic confession. It was something much simpler, something so ordinary that most people would have ignored it without a second thought. Yet for him, it became the first piece of a puzzle that was growing more complicated with every passing hour. He stood there for a moment, staring at the small detail that had caught his eye. On its own, it meant almost nothing. But combined with everything else he had noticed over the past few weeks, it was enough to make him pause. Instead of jumping to conclusions, he quietly put the thought aside and continued with his morning, hoping there would be a simple explanation. As the day went on, he found himself paying attention to little things he would normally overlook. His wife seemed unusually eager to change the subject whenever he mentioned future family plans. His stepson, who usually spent most of his free time in his room, appeared to be helping around the house more than ever. The positive attitude should have been reassuring, yet something about the timing felt strange. That evening, the family sat down for dinner together. The conversation was light, filled with everyday topics, but there were moments when his wife and stepson exchanged brief looks that he couldn't quite understand. They weren't arguing, they weren't whispering, and they certainly weren't behaving in a way that clearly suggested anything was wrong. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that they both knew something he didn't. At the same time, another thought kept bothering him. Maybe the real problem wasn't hidden secrets at all. Maybe he had become so busy with work that he had slowly drifted away from the people he cared about most. Perhaps his wife and stepson had simply grown closer while he was distracted by long hours and constant stress. That possibility hurt just as much because it forced him to question his own role in the family's changing dynamics. Even with those doubts, his instincts refused to settle. He decided he wouldn't make accusations or demand answers. Instead, he would quietly observe a little longer. If there was nothing to worry about, the truth would eventually put his mind at ease. But if the uneasy feeling in his heart was pointing toward something real, he knew the days ahead were about to test his family in ways none of them could have imagined. Over the next several days, he stopped looking for dramatic answers and started paying attention to ordinary moments instead. Sometimes the smallest details reveal the biggest truths. He noticed that his wife had become careful with her schedule, often saying she had errands to run without giving many details. His stepson seemed unusually interested in knowing when he would be home from work, casually asking about his plans in a way that had never stood out before. None of these things proved anything, but together they created an uneasy feeling that refused to disappear. Every time he convinced himself he was imagining it, another small moment would pull him back into uncertainty. His mind became a constant battle between trust and suspicion. He wanted to believe in his family, yet he couldn't ignore the quiet voice telling him something was missing. One Friday evening, an unexpected change in his schedule brought him home much earlier than anyone anticipated. As he pulled into the driveway, he immediately noticed that the house was unusually quiet. There were no raised voices, no obvious signs of trouble, just an odd silence that seemed heavier than normal. He unlocked the front door as quietly as possible, not because he intended to catch anyone doing something wrong, but because he didn't want to interrupt whatever was happening inside. From the hallway, he could hear faint voices coming from another room. They weren't arguing. In fact, they sounded calm, almost relieved. He couldn't make out every word, but one sentence reached him clearly enough to make him stop in his tracks. "We can't keep hiding this forever." His heart started racing. Countless possibilities rushed through his mind at once. Was this the secret he had been searching for? Was there a misunderstanding waiting to be cleared up, or had his worst fears been leading him toward this exact moment all along? He took one slow step closer to the doorway. Just as he was about to see who was speaking and finally uncover the truth, the conversation suddenly stopped. The room fell completely silent, and someone slowly began walking toward the door. He instinctively stepped back before the door opened. A second later, his stepson walked into the hallway carrying a plain cardboard box. The teenager looked surprised to see him standing there, but only for a brief moment. Then he forced a smile and casually asked, "You're home early?" It was such a normal question, yet it carried an awkward pause that neither of them knew how to fill. Before he could answer, his wife appeared behind them. She greeted him warmly, but he noticed the quick glance she exchanged with her son. It lasted less than a second, though it was enough to bring back every doubt that had been building over the past several weeks. He looked at the box. It was sealed tightly with tape, and there was no label on it. His wife quickly picked it up and said it contained old household items they planned to sort through later. The explanation sounded reasonable. Still, something about the timing made it difficult for him to simply let it go. That evening, he tried to act as though everything was normal. They watched television together, talked about everyday life, and even laughed at a few jokes. From the outside, they looked like any ordinary family spending time together. But underneath those quiet moments, he felt an invisible wall growing between them. Later that night, unable to sleep, he replayed the afternoon in his mind. The words he had overheard echoed over and over, "We can't keep hiding this forever." He realized that sentence could mean almost anything. It didn't automatically point to betrayal. It could involve financial problems, a surprise celebration, a personal struggle, or something completely unrelated. The uncertainty became even more frustrating because his imagination kept filling in the blanks. The following day brought another unexpected surprise. While organizing paperwork in the home office, he came across an envelope addressed to his wife. It had already been opened, but one page inside was missing. Before he could read more than a few lines, he heard footsteps approaching. Without thinking, he slipped the envelope back exactly where he had found it. His wife entered the room carrying 2 cups of coffee. She smiled naturally, as though nothing was unusual, and asked if everything was all right. For a brief moment, he considered telling her about the strange feeling that had been following him for weeks. Instead, he simply smiled back and said he was tired. But deep down, he knew one thing had changed. This was no longer just a collection of confusing moments. Somewhere beneath the ordinary routines of their family life, a hidden truth was waiting to surface. And with each passing day, it felt less like a question of if he would discover it, and more like a question of whether their family would ever be the same once he did. That evening, he decided he couldn't keep living with unanswered questions. Instead of making accusations, he asked his wife if they could sit down and have an honest conversation after dinner. She looked nervous, then quietly nodded. His stepson noticed the serious mood and started to leave the room, but his mother gently asked him to stay. For a few long seconds, no one spoke. Finally, he took a deep breath and admitted everything. He explained how the unusual behavior, the quiet conversations, the sealed box, the missing paperwork, and the sentence he had overheard had slowly convinced him that something important was being hidden from him. He wasn't angry anymore. He was simply exhausted from trying to guess the truth. His wife lowered her eyes before looking back at him. "You're right," she said softly. "We have been keeping something from you. But it's not what you think." She walked to the hallway closet and brought back the same cardboard box he had seen earlier. This time, she opened it in front of him. Inside were old family photographs, handwritten letters, and several notebooks filled with memories from the years before they became a blended family. His stepson quietly explained that they had been collecting stories, pictures, and messages from relatives who lived in different cities. The missing page from the envelope had been part of a letter requesting copies of important family documents to complete a surprise memory project. The secret conversations had been about contacting relatives without accidentally revealing their plan. The sentence he overheard, "We can't keep hiding this forever," had simply meant they were running out of time before sharing everything with him. A wave of relief washed over him, followed almost immediately by guilt. He realized how easily fear and uncertainty had shaped the story inside his own mind. Instead of asking questions early, he had allowed small misunderstandings to grow into something much bigger. Just as the tension seemed to disappear, his stepson reached into the bottom of the box and pulled out one final envelope. "This part wasn't supposed to happen today," he admitted. Inside was a letter written years earlier by a family member who had recently passed away. It contained a personal message encouraging everyone to stay connected, communicate openly, and never let assumptions replace honest conversations. None of them had known the letter even existed until they sorted through the old boxes. The room fell silent once again, but this time the silence carried understanding instead of suspicion. The mystery had ended, yet the unexpected letter reminded them that trust isn't built by avoiding difficult conversations. It's built by having them before doubt has a chance to write its own ending. The days that followed felt different in the best possible way. The heavy silence that had filled the house was replaced by honest conversations. Instead of assuming what the other person was thinking, they made a promise to ask questions first. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but it was a fresh start that everyone genuinely wanted. One weekend, they finally finished opening every box that had been sitting in the closet for weeks. Together they looked through faded photographs, old birthday cards, and handwritten notes from family members who had shaped their lives long before they all lived under the same roof. Every picture carried a memory, every letter told a story, and every conversation helped them understand one another a little better. His stepson surprised him the most. During one quiet afternoon, the teenager admitted that he had been worried the surprise would never come together. He had wanted everything to be perfect because he appreciated the effort his stepfather had made over the years. Building a blended family had not always been easy, but he had noticed every school event, every encouraging conversation, and every small act of support. Keeping the project secret had become stressful, and he now understood why it had accidentally created so much confusion. His wife also apologized for choosing secrecy instead of simple honesty. She explained that she had become so focused on protecting the surprise that she never stopped to consider how unusual her behavior looked from the outside. Looking back, she realized that even a short conversation could have prevented weeks of unnecessary worry. He smiled and admitted he had learned something important as well. Trust doesn't mean ignoring concerns, but it also doesn't mean letting fear create answers without evidence. Relationships grow stronger when people communicate openly, especially during moments of uncertainty. That lesson stayed with him long after the mystery had been resolved. Months later, the memory book was finally complete. It sat on the living room shelf where anyone could pick it up and add another story whenever they wanted. What had started as a misunderstanding had become a symbol of their family's journey, one built on patience, forgiveness, and honest communication. Looking back, he realized the greatest challenge wasn't uncovering a hidden secret. It was learning that assumptions can sometimes be more damaging than the truth itself. Their family wasn't perfect, and it never would be. But they had discovered that listening, asking questions, and giving one another the benefit of the doubt were far more powerful than suspicion. If this emotional family story reminded you how important trust and communication are, remember this: the strongest relationships are not the ones without misunderstandings. They're the ones where people choose honesty, compassion, and understanding before letting doubt take control. Sometimes, the happiest ending begins with a simple conversation that should have happened from the very start.